Welcome, everyone. This is our panel titled Pro-Life Perspectives. So if you only hear about the pro-life movement in the media, something that you might not think is quite obvious is the diversity within our ranks. The stereotype that I'm sure that we've all heard by now is that of the old conservative Christian straight white man. As our panelists today will demonstrate, that's not exactly representative of our movement as a whole. To be clear, some of my best friends are old conservative Christian straight white, and they certainly have a place within our movement. However, we also know that there are others. We have people like Jazzi, people like Kristen, people like Tom, who is not yet an old conservative straight white man. But something that I've said a lot about the pro-life movement is that if we truly want to end the violence of abortion, we're going to need all types of people on board. We also need people doing all sorts of different work. Our movement is not one of just politicians or just lawyers or just sidewalk advocates or just protest organizers or just artists. If we want to succeed in creating the culture of life that I know is possible, we also need a diversity of tactics. Today, our wonderful panelists come from all different backgrounds and all occupy different spaces within the larger movement to protect unborn children. I'm very grateful to have them all here today. Again, we will be going through one by one and allowing our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their work. And I do have some questions prepared, but of course, please continue dropping questions in the chat, and I hope to get to all of them. So I am going to mute everyone except for the person I asked to speak, and that is Kristen Day.
Oh, I get to go first. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and welcome, and just excited to see all these participants. Well, I don't see you all, but I know you're out there because I've been watching the chat. So yes, Herb, exactly what you said. I agree 100%. We just need a diversity within the movement and everybody focusing on something different and trying to end abortion through every avenue possible. And we may not all agree with each other's strategies and what they're doing, but it's going to take everybody doing their part to end abortion. So obviously I'm from the pro-life Democrat perspective, and we were just talking about my sign behind me, and that is who we are. We're pro-life for the whole life. So we go beyond abortion, and we are against the death penalty, that we're talking about in the earlier panel, and against physician-assisted suicide. So we believe in the fundamental worth, dignity, and equality of all people, and we believe the protection of human life is the foundation of human rights, authentic freedom, and good government. So these beliefs include opposition to abortion, euthanasia, capital punishment, embryonic stem cell research, poverty, genocide, and all other injustices that directly and indirectly affect human life. So I was proud yesterday to march with my good friend from Georgia. She came up from Georgia, and she's also the director of African American outreach for Democrats for Life, Harriet Bradley. She's my good friend. We both went to Michigan State, different times, but so we bond over that. And also I was joined by Gloria Purvis, who is just an amazing pro-life advocate as well. And we marched from the Lincoln to the Martin Luther King Memorial, and it was just like such an encouraging day, and many people from Rehumanize were there too, so we enjoyed hanging out with our Rehumanize friends yesterday. So so this whole life perspective is so important, but particularly the abortion issue is one that is our main focus within our own party, because you see how the party has transformed into this whole life on a lot of issues, but when it comes to the abortion issue, they've really turned into this party that is just disregards these babies, if they're unwanted in particularly. So there's a differentiation between an unwanted baby and a wanted baby. And the party's platform is just really destructive this year, more so than years past. And the party is really out of touch with the numbers of pro-life Democrats, and it's very the diversity of opinion and support for candidates is not respected, and it affects state legislators and all around the country. So since 2010, Democrats have lost their political advantage in southern states like Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. And I hear from people in those states that, yes, they might have pro-life because the Republicans have won and they are able to pass pro-life legislation, but they don't pass legislation for education or healthcare or programs that help people who need assistance. And so the Democrats have really lost their advantage down there. So I think they had a trifecta, meaning House, state, and Senate, and only 15 states compared to 27 in 2010. So the Democrats, they went from 27 House, Senate governorship down to 15. So that's a huge decrease in Democratic-controlled legislatures. So I have to say, though, the only red state that is not controlled by a Democrat governor is the state of my favorite state of Louisiana, who we have Governor John Bel Edwards, who is just tremendous, a whole life, pro-life for the whole life. And I'm so proud of what he's done down in Louisiana to really promote this whole life view and passing Medicaid expansion. He's focusing on foster care and trying to get children out of foster care into permanent families. And he's talked about teacher pay raise and just this whole life and true to the beliefs that we hold. And so it's just very exciting to have him. And I think he's the future of our movement. And that is why we really need pro-life Democrats to be louder, bolder, and get out there more, because our party has been overrun by abortion advocates, and we need to fight back, and we need to fight back hard. We've been silent for a long time, and we have just kind of gone along with the party when we could live with Bill Clinton when he talked about safe, legal, and rare. We could live with President Obama when he worked with us to we added in the platform, let's reduce abortion. So we could live with that, because we had this common goal to reduce abortion. But Hillary Clinton changed the platform for the worst. And a lot of pro-life Democrats didn't go out and vote. And then this platform, I didn't think it could get any worse, but it did. Talking about codifying Roe v. Wade. So we just have a huge, we said it was an uphill battle, but I think two things happened that in the last year. One, I don't know if you all remember, in January, I confronted Mayor Pete Buttigieg in Des Moines, Iowa. And I stood up and I said, it was a simple question. Do you think there's space for pro-life Democrats in the party? And he basically said no. But in that moment in time was just, I think Teresa with Pro-Life San Francisco was with me, one of our board members, Xavier, was with me, and Kristen Vale from our Colorado chapter. We were sitting in the hotel bar after that and just thinking about that moment. And Twitter just exploded. And because Katie Pavlik posted something about the interaction, said some woman did this. And so I retweeted, that woman was me. And I think we just watched Twitter, and I think it was retweeted like 50,000 times or maybe more. And we were like, this is the beginning of, of something, that a wake-up call for pro-life Democrats. And it certainly was. And we have just seen growth and volunteers coming in and we find candidates who are more brave and bold. And the second thing that happened was the loss of Dan Lipinski, which was so sad, but so exciting because people saw his courage. They saw his integrity. And they said, we need to do that too, because if more of us stand up and have that courage and integrity, people will follow. And so I feel why this platform, and we don't have a lot of choices in this presidential election with either Trump or Biden, I feel like the movement is at a point where we're going to make a difference. And, we're looking down the road and we're looking at 2024 and we're looking at recruiting John Bel Edwards to run in 2024. So I want you to all stand by and wait and join us then. But in the meantime, please, get out there and talk to your Democratic legislators. Tell them that you're pro-life. Don't be afraid. We are the majority in this country, people who want to see abortion obsolete. So I will leave it there so we can have time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Sure.
Next up, I'd like to hear from Tom. Tom works with Americans United for Life. Tom, I believe you are unmuted. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Herb. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Okay. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So Americans United for Life is one of America's oldest national organizations. And, it was founded in 1971 before Roe v. Wade, before so much of what we think of as current culture of life issues really popped, really came to dominate so much of our social and political and really just daily life in the issues as we try to navigate them, right? Not just as those cultural and political issues, but as issues of, human personhood, as issues of family, right? How do we take care of people in our own lives, whether our mothers and fathers, whether we find ourselves in a situation of encountering an unexpected pregnancy and navigating a situation like that, or whether a case of long-term care, right? Living with an illness or other disease and trying to navigate that in a life-affirming way, in a hopeful way. So Americans United for Life was founded to address what ultimately became Roe v. Wade by folks in Chicago and by folks across the country. You look at our letterhead from back in the day, nearly 50 years ago, and there are leaders from everywhere from Harvard Divinity School to, state and local organizations across America, from, Massachusetts to California and from Illinois to Florida. And so I think in a certain way, we can take a lot of heart in that on the one level, you can look and say, gosh, almost 50 years, it seems in certain sense like nothing has changed. Maybe it seems maybe in a different sense that maybe things have gotten worse because the issues have sort of expanded. But we look at it in a different way. We say that Americans, sort of as Kristen pointed out, Americans have consistently been pro-life in their demeanor because it's a part of the human heart, right? It's a natural instinct for us to encounter a difficult situation and try to say, how can we do the best in this moment for another person in my life? That's some of the stuff that Amy spoke to earlier today. What are some of the things that we can know just fundamentally about the human person? And then once we intuit those things, once we kind of give ourselves enough time for our conscience to wrestle with those issues, give ourselves a little bit of space, a little bit of silence, a little bit of breathing room, those sort of things that can be particularly tough in an election year like this. Once we do those things, then we can shift into the questions of, what does a good society look like? What does good law and policy look like? And that's where Americans United for Life comes in and partners with organizations like Democrats for Life, like Pro-Life San Francisco, like folks from across the country, coast to coast, to figure out in your state, in your locality, what can be done in light of your governor, in light of your state legislature, in light of your U.S. senators and representatives. What can be done then in Washington, maybe too, to push, right? We heard a little bit about that on the death penalty and opportunities to push from a more local level to a national level. And so we try to take where people are and help them actualize a more life-affirming law and policy. There are a lot of things, take an example of something like fetal homicide laws, right? Which is a very kind of lawyerly way to just say protections for human beings. Fetal homicide laws, are in place in the majority of the states, and Americans United for Life played a fundamental role in putting them in place, after Roe v. Wade was handed down, when it seemed like maybe the discussion was over because 7 men on the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision that wiped out the Democratic will in the majority of the states. A lot of people thought maybe there's nothing we can do, but fetal homicide laws, protections for human beings, are an example of what can be done. Things like the Hyde Amendment, which is really just saying that taxpayer funding shouldn't go to pay for abortions that aren't medically necessary, that are totally elective. The Hyde Amendment has saved millions of lives, and Americans United for Life defended that successfully in front of the Supreme Court. We continue to do so much today. Those are just two examples where I know, especially taxpayer funding of non-medically necessary abortions are in the news because Nancy Pelosi most recently has promised to turn on the funding spigots for that if she's able to in the next Congress. But I think this is a point at which we can, again, kind of pause and say, let's look at the society we want to build and understand fundamentally that, the intersection of all these issues on the personal level in families, on the state and federal level with lawmakers, and then on the philosophical level, the conceptual level, the level of intuition and conscience, these things relate to government and relate to issues of power, because government at a certain level exists to not just sort of play referee, right? A referee can't function without the rules of the game. And so, the rules of the game come in place because they're there to make the game fun, right? You can't have a good game if there aren't clear rules that everybody's having a good time. And so the connective tissue there is realizing that government does exist to, in a certain sense, teach about what is good and what is bad. And so just as we have something like the death penalty, where we're realizing that maybe it's not good to teach, but the state should have the power to kill or to execute, especially in cases where the evidence remains unclear, I think we realize on issues of human life across the spectrum that we can't just treat this as if human right to life issues, whether abortion or suicide by physician, we can't treat them as if they're like the equivalent of a tax policy, where some people want to have a tax rate of 39% and some want a tax rate of 35%. We've got to remember that government teaches by its law and policy. And as wonky as law and policy can sometimes seem, I know, having worked in it every day, it ultimately is about that, about the moral conscience of the nation and what we exist to teach future generations. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Tom. Jazzi, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Pro-Life San Francisco?
Yeah, let's do a testing. Do you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so my name is Jazzi. I'm an organizer with Pro-Life San Francisco. And Pro-Life San Francisco is a millennial-led nonprofit human rights organization for pro-life people from across the political, ideological, and generational spectrum. We're dedicated to creating a culture of peace where the preborn members of our human family are protected from violent and lethal discrimination of abortion. And the way we do this is through a few different actions. We increase community awareness through online and in-person engagement, lectures, debates, public appearances. I mean, you will see our director, Teresa, everywhere. Demonstrations, protests, and other creative educational efforts that uphold our commitment to the values of equality, nonviolence, and non-discrimination. And we assist those facing pregnancy decisions by connecting them with the resources they need to thrive, such as prenatal care, financial assistance, job placement, childcare, information regarding their Title X rights, and accessing non-violent reproductive healthcare options. And I mean, we're here in San Francisco, the Bay Area. It could not be what we would say is more liberal, democratic, whatever kind of pro-choice that you want to call it as. And so we truly believe at Pro-Life San Francisco that if we can make San Francisco pro-life, the world will follow. San Francisco is leading in that way. I mean, during all of the protests and riots, I got a lot of questions if San Francisco was like burning. And I was like, no, we're used to protests here. Like it's kind of what we do here. So it actually went well. It was pretty smooth actually. So for a place like San Francisco, that it's part of the reason I got involved with Pro-Life San Francisco is for a place that tells everybody you're welcome here, you have a place here, you fit in here, and when the rest of the world would discard you, San Francisco will take you in. We want that to get extended to the life in the womb. And personally, myself in San Francisco, I actually am not from here. I moved here about a year and a half ago to help plant a church. And so my part in Pro-Life San Francisco, which I love, is my entire upbringing with regards to the pro-life movement was always in a Christian atmosphere and with regards to my church, which I'm still heavily involved in. But I realized soon, probably by college age, that telling people that babies are miracles and that Jesus loves them, it's not going to work for a lot of people, especially for the people whose minds I want to see change with regards to the dignity of the unborn. And so with connecting with Pro-Life San Francisco, I found a place where not only was I challenged on my own beliefs and how can I discuss abortion with people who do not have the same religion as I do, and being able to meet people where they're at and have those conversations based on science. instead of just religion. And I love it because it's given me a place, I feel like, to bridge the gap, being that someone that is a devout Christian, heavily involved in my church, but living in San Francisco, and being able to bridge the gap between very right-wing conservative Republicans and left-leaning Democrats, because even though I am a Christian and pro-life, which people would assume that meant I was Republican, and I have very conservative views, but I'm also against the death penalty. I'm a vegan. I'm for taking care of our planet. So there's a lot of things that put me on both sides of the spectrum. And I feel like I've been tasked with the job of bridging that gap. And that's my aim with Pro-Life San Francisco. And I have found a place there, even being a Christian in a liberal city with a non-religious organization, where my voice is valid, it's heard. And that's what I want people to know about the pro-life movement, overarching. There's, I think, the biggest voices in the pro-life movement are very right-leaning, conservative, Republican Christians. And my hope and goal for the pro-life movement is to see that no longer be the case, not because their voices aren't valid, but because it shouldn't be a political issue. It shouldn't be a religious issue. It should just be a human rights issue. And we should see people across the board stand against abortion. And so that's why I'm, it's an honor to serve with Pro-Life San Francisco. It's an honor to be here with you guys today, because I think there's been certain voices that have spoke very loudly for the pro-life movement, to its detriment and to its benefit. And so I'm excited for this. I'm excited for what the future looks like for the pro-life movement.
Great. Thank you so much. So going into questions, I see we do have some in the chat. Feel free to keep dropping them, everyone. But I want to start with Kristen. Earlier last week, I believe, I don't know, everything is blurring together now.
It really is.
Time doesn't mean anything in 2020. But a couple days ago, we were outside the DNC together protesting the Democratic National Convention, trying to bring to both the media attention and also the delegates and, everyone's attention, the sort of extremist policies in the platform as it regards to abortion. I think my question for you is, at what point are you ever going to give up? Are you at any point, are you going to say, they're too far gone, Planned Parenthood owns the party, and we should just give up and start voting Republican, or start voting third party, or do something else? Or are you in this forever?
Well, first of all, I was born in April, and I'm a Taurus. So I never give up. And I've run 21 marathons too. So that tells my strength, and I will never give up, no matter how hard it is. And I think there have been points during this fight that I have thought, we're not making any progress, and should I keep going? And I tell you, every time that happens, someone contacts me. And they say, thank you for representing me, and thank you for fighting for us. And that just keeps me going. I hear from people every day, and especially now, because we've had just this unprecedented growth at Democrats for Life, where more people are learning about us and finding about us. And so I think right now, there's definitely not the time to give up, even with this terrible platform language. And I think, you and I being at the DNC last, was it 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, if you looked back at the speeches, there was a noticeable difference between 2020 and 2016. 2016, I was there during the speech by Planned Parenthood, Cecile Richards, and just made me sick to watch her during prime time speak about killing babies. Do you notice, if you watched it, there wasn't this fixation with reproductive rights, abortion. It was very muted. And I think that is because they know it's a losing issue. They're starting to learn it. And when you look at the Republican convention, Abby Johnson spoke. We had a nun who was speaking about pro-life, and it was they're not hiding this issue at all. They're embracing it because they know that it will help them, especially in the swing states. Yeah. And so the parties listening, they're hearing us. They haven't processed it yet. To understand that this voting bloc of 21 million pro-life Democrats is not going to come out and vote for Joe Biden. Some of them will, but there's a lot of them who are going to stay home like they did in 2016. And so if he wants to win, he has to recognize that. And if he loses, it's going to be because he didn't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to go to Jazzi. Something that I really appreciate every time I end up working with Pro-Life San Francisco, which is often because I will take any excuse possible to go visit San Francisco, is I think just both the sort of, racial diversity, but also the ideological diversity within your group. You're led, of course, by Teresa Bukovac, famous pro-life feminist atheist, who will be joining us later today in a session. But when I speak to a lot of your members, there's staunch conservatives, there's libertarians, there's sort of everyone, every type of person, people call themselves socialists from your group. And I think that's really exciting to see from, a growing large group of pro-lifers who I think are making a serious impact. So I think I just want to ask you, how do you get that? How do you work together? How do you reach out to people, even though sort of your leadership is so diverse in that way?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, first and foremost, the reason that we have such a diverse group is because of Teresa. And I will, to the day I die, probably stand and applaud her constantly because, like you said, she's a feminist. She's very left-leaning. She's an atheist, but she does not make you feel like you don't fit in the conversation, regardless of what you believe. She's even gotten some flack for that, for letting people that are very Republican, conservatives, even Trump supporters, but that are pro-life, sit at her table. And she's gotten flack for that, but she refuses to mute people's voices because of other difference of opinion. And so because of that, I think she's also instilled that in all of us as people. You can't sign on to her to be in Pro-Life San Francisco if you don't also do that as well, because then you'd have a lot of issues with the leadership. And so then I think because of that, she's instilled that in us. And she also, I think people that have that same feeling are attracted to her because that's what I was desiring. I was desiring people that didn't, that it wasn't just one type of voice so that we could talk to more people. And so then because of how she's led the group, we also feel that same way. And then it's easy for us to reach our people. So like I said, I am easily able to talk to people in my church. So I can bring in those people. When they find out they can have a voice in this organization and they feel comfortable, then they do. And because of the diversity, we are able to have conversations with very different people in whichever way that they relate to it. So it started with Teresa. I mean, it's going to end with Teresa. She's fabulous. Don't worry. She doesn't pay me, so I have no reason to say this. But that's really how it is. So I don't really feel like it's not hard. I feel like to then talk to people because it is, I mean, not to use that it's a safe space, but it is though. It's for people who are like, are you pro-life? Okay, then let's fight for that and point blank period. And then we can deal with the other stuff and have discussions on the other things. But if you're pro-life, your voice matters here. And so I think people are attracted to that because a lot of them are like, well, I'm not Democratic, but I'm pro-life, or I'm not Republican, but I'm pro-life. And they want to find some place they fit, and they fit with us.
Thank you. That's great. Tom, a question I have for you is, I don't know how to frame this. I think what I'm trying to say is something that I really like about AUL is that you tend to stick to policy, and especially when it comes to sort of regulating abortion and trying to chip away at the other side's gains. And I really appreciate that because it means that you tend to stay a little bit further away from the partisan politics of it. You end up having to work with all different types. And I sort of just want to ask how does that work within AUL? Is there tension there? Do we want to be one of the groups that says, you have to vote for Trump because he's the one that's going to help us with these judicial nominations? I would like your perspective on that.
Yeah. From the beginning, Americans United for Life has been a big tent, right? So it's sort of the same ideas that we're speaking about with Pro-Life San Francisco and with Democrats for Life. There's never been a time when we've said that only certain types of people can be pro-life, right? Because again, before Roe, which was the key legislative moment, you know, when the courts knocked down good legislation and imposed its own will, before that moment, Americans were just pro-life. If you ask them that phrase, you know, do you consider yourself pro-life? I think most people would probably look at you kind of like you're a weirdo, because it's like, what does that even mean? If, like, you know, and then you explain, do you want to care for your neighbors? Do you want to care for your children? Do you want to care for your parents? They'd say, of course. But now, in our current political moment, because of the courts, we think of this in an ideological sense, right? There's factions. And so, you know, for AUL, you know, the name that we started with is the name we have today, Americans United for Life, right? And today, maybe that seems aspirational. Maybe it seems fantastical in certain senses to people who think, you know, we could never be united on these issues. But our name was chosen at a time when that was the reality, right? It was there to preserve the existing reality that wasn't just there in state laws, right? It wasn't there in state laws from the beginning of the American Republic. There were laws against things like infanticide and abortion. You know, from the moment that science could detect human life, right? That, you know, what we think of archaically as quickening, the very first moment you could detect human life, the law recognized properly, oh yes, this too is a member of the human family. This creature too deserves equal protection. It's those things that were the reality. And so that united aspect of our name is something that today is aspirational, because we want to get back there, but we weren't named that, and it hasn't been a part of our ethos because it's been simply an aspiration. It's a reality that we carry with us through our work. Obviously, I wasn't there in 1971, but in speaking with many of the people who were, and recognizing that this is an intergenerational fight, you know, the same as something like William Wilberforce's campaign against slavery. These things can take sometimes decades, sometimes centuries. Our founders knew that. You know, we were building for a multi-generational fight, and I think, you know, we continue to walk arm in arm, you know, forward into the future on this fundamental human rights issue.
Something about this panel, another aspect of diversity, you might say, differing perspectives, is within our own organizations that we organize with, we all have different focuses when it comes to what issues we're taking on. And I think that's a good thing. You know, Rehumanize International, obviously, this is a consistent life ethic conference. We oppose violence against all human beings, regardless of age or circumstance. Kristen's organization, Democrats for Life of America, also has that whole life perspective. Tom's is a little bit like that. They do both abortion and euthanasia and assisted suicide issues. Jazzi's, on the other hand, is single issue. And I think that is another aspect of the pro-life movement that deserves to be highlighted a little bit, to say we all have different missions within the larger mission. And I want to just address that. And I think, Jazzi, what I'd like to see from you is, how do you feel that being single issue might benefit your outreach? And then I'm going to go to Kristen and ask, how do you think being multi-issue might benefit your outreach? And then I'm going to swing over to Tom and tell us how that hybrid works out for him. So, Jazzi?
I think the way it benefits, like we're going to hear from Kristen, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. I think the way it benefits is it just keeps us very focused. The conversation is always about abortion, but even in that regards, it's actually quite multifaceted, because then we focus on not just abortion legislation, but also how can we give more care to people that are pregnant? How can we take care of people after they have the baby as well? So it is focused on abortion, but also the pre and after birth as well. So I would say that it just helps us stay focused on one issue. Like I said, bridging the gap between different political parties, focusing on that. And then we do talk about different dichotomies within abortion. So how it affects the people of color, which is kind of one of my main focuses. So I focus a lot on bridging the gap between the two different parties with regards to abortion, as well as speaking to, obviously, because I am a woman of color, I do have a little bit more of authority in that topic. And so speaking to different, specifically Black women, about how abortion is, I mean, just completely decimating our people and hurting us. So even though, yes, we are single focused, I think that's probably would be the benefit, is it helps us focus on a lot of the niche issues within abortion.
Thank you. Kristen?
Yeah, so I think by being pro-life for the whole life, part of our overall mission is to bring the Democratic Party into a consistent position of protecting the whole life, because our party is good on, almost 90% of the issues, except for this one. So we have to have this broad. It benefits us to have a little bit broader perspective and not focusing just on abortion, because we sort of have to prove that who we are. We have to prove that we are Democrats, and we have to, because that's who we are. We're Democrats for life. But having this broader perspective of, supporting paid leave, supporting, programs that help women carry the pregnancy to term, and, the whole broader perspective of life benefits us in that way. I think if we were to just focus on abortion, I think we would lose a little bit of credibility, and they would say, well, then you're just Republicans. Because we do get that anyway. We do get people saying that, you're just Republicans. It's like, well, look at our platform, and look at the candidates we support, and we're just trying to make our party the party of Hubert Humphrey. When he talked, he spoke about protecting life from womb to tomb. Not in those words, but there's a great quote out there from him talking about protecting life from womb to the twilight of life. And so I think that we have to have a broader perspective to sort of to prove that we're Democrats, and to prove that we support our party on all these issues. So it's really important to have that broad perspective. But we're trying to change on the one, so it is a big focus for us. But the overall whole life perspective is a benefit to society as well as our organization.
Thank you so much. Tom?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I might have had some connective issues there. Apologies for that. So yeah, I think both are tremendous perspectives, right? And it does come together in the sense that single issue voters, right? You hear that phrase from time to time. You don't hear it as much today, but it's the idea of voting on a single issue has kind of historically, maybe past 10 or 20 years especially, kind of been derided, right? Like, with the implication there that sort of like only a fool would vote on a single issue, right? I'm the enlightened one. I vote on a holistic thing, right? But what's lost in that is that, most people are motivated by single issues. It's the most natural thing in the world to be motivated by a single issue. And that single issue usually connects to all the other issues in your life, right? You think about that in the most common sense way of like life in your neighborhood, right? And it's a single issue, it's a single encounter that might be the thing that spurs you to get involved in your local town council or your local HOA or whatever else. It's those things that provide sort of the invitation to consider ourselves as a part, an equal member in a political and social community. And so, when there's that disparagement sometimes from politicians or from others, that certainly you wouldn't be so naive as to let a single issue sway your vote. It's like, pick any number of other issues, and of course you would. On the political realm, we mentioned William Wilberforce. He would have been a single issue voter, right? And thank God for that. And you look at the civil rights movement, and there are any number of people who became single issue voters as their conscience was woken up on those issues of justice. And so, at Americans United for Life, and I think, just broadly in terms of a common sense perspective, it's okay. First of all, we want to create the space to say, you can be a single issue voter, and then over time, welcome folks into that political and social community in the way that people like Teresa Bukovac have, and show them that single issues are, one star in the greater constellation of, in this case, for our cause, human rights issues, but in a broader sense, human issues, issues of social and political justice. And so start there and then expand beyond it.
Thank you so much. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, so just to wrap things up, I'm going to go around. Please tell me what you think are the next steps for your corner of the movement, where we can follow your work, and just what you think is next for us, for the pro-life movement at large. Kristen, we're going to start with you.
Okay, so the next big thing for us is we're starting a candidate recruitment. We have a candidate recruitment committee, and we're going to kick off our Run Pro-Life in the next couple weeks. So we are looking for candidates to run as pro-life Democrats. So think about it. Think about running, because you could make a difference. You could run as a pro-life Democrat. You could help us take our party back. So I want everybody on here to just think what you could do. Think of the possibilities. And we have this great candidate recruitment committee that will help you. So that's the next big thing for us. And then secondly, I'm going to give a second one, 2024, John Bell Edwards. So everybody start thinking about that and thinking how we can persuade him to run for us.
Thank you so much. Next up, Jazzi.
Yeah, we're good.
Yes.
All right. I would say the next steps, you're going to see a lot more protests and pushing the the Democrats to incorporate the pro-life movement inside of it. I would say you could follow us at Pro-Life SF on Instagram, and then follow Teresa, because you will see her doing all the things that we're involved in. And one quick little thing I just wanted to say, even just from reading the chat and hearing this conversation, there seems to be some back and forth about legislation versus care and things of that nature. And I would just say one of the main things, even within what we're trying to do here with regards to, challenging the Democrat Party to bring in abortion, even wanting people that are on the Republican side maybe to have a more consistent life ethic. I think every single part is valid. And I would hate to see any of us say, yeah, I push legislation. Oh, well, I'm more about carrying people, as if one is better than the other, changing hearts and minds or changing legislation. It all matters. It all has a part. We need, the last thing I would hate to see is people that are, within even the abortion conversation, now fighting over whether we should be pushing legislation or changing hearts and minds. It all matters. And we need to do all of it, because if the legislation never changes, then we can change hearts and minds. And if legislation changes, we can also be changing hearts and minds. And so every single one of you has a place here, regardless of what it is that you're doing. And so I would just encourage you all to, wherever it is that you feel called, a motivation, whatever it is, with regards to the pro-life movement, the consistent life ethic, then run after your lane, because all lanes matter. We need to be in all the different lanes. And then that's when we'll really see a change.
Thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful point. I was thinking sort of the same thing in the chat. It was like, oh, that's exactly the point of this exact this panel. So I'm so happy you put that so eloquently, Jazzi. Next up, Tom, next steps. What is up?
Okay, yeah, so sorry, I'm on like some kind of cable news satellite delay here on my end, so I apologize again. But I think AUL, Americans United for Life, is easy to find. It's AUL.org, and if you're not familiar with our work, definitely invite you to reach out. You can find us on Twitter and connect with me as well. We'd love to introduce you to it. We have a podcast that, Kristen and Herb have both been on, so we've got to get Jazzi on next. Life, Liberty, and Law is our podcast. It's just weekly conversations on the human right to life. And I think we've talked about the Big Ten aspect. We try to do that in the podcast. We do it in a way where we know that not everybody's going to agree, but we want to have frank and honest conversations. And I think just going forward, after November, there are going to be a lot of Americans who are upset, right? There's a lot of tension right now. The tension's not going to go away. It might change. It might change in how it's expressed, but there are going to be millions, tens of millions maybe, of Americans who are not pleased, regardless of what the outcome is. And I think in that sense, we have to remember that a lot of the issues we deal with are political, because that's one of the arenas they have to be addressed in. But we can't allow ourselves, whatever our beliefs, to become solely political animals, because actually we sort of lose a bit of our humanity in doing that. right? And when we make ourselves just creatures of sort of political violence in a sense, rhetorically or otherwise, we've got to remember, that we got to keep a society together. And so, I think on the life issues, especially, the sort of the proof will be in the pudding in how we can do that post-November, again, regardless of the outcome electorally. How do we knit ourselves back together? How do we push forward? Whether that means defending something like the Hyde Amendment, or whether it means pushing those kind of protections even further.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this panel. You are all some of my favorite members, collaborators in the pro-life movement and in these circles. And while I'm very disappointed that most of the in-person events have been canceled for the foreseeable future, I'm so happy that we were able to connect in this way. Please, again, all of you, drop your links, everything we can do to find you, your organizations on social media. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm kicking you all out of the chat now.
Thank you for